Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Uncommon Advisors podcast. You're with myself, Meehir, Stephen, and Avneet. And today we want to talk to you about what a typical engagement looks like with us. If you go on a advisory journey with us, with a consulting journey with us. So we're going to talk you through our process. And hopefully, if any questions that you may wonder about, or it's a bit nebulous, this world of consulting or management consulting and what the bloody F that we do, hopefully today we'll pick that apart and give you a little bit of insight behind the curtain. So the first question I want to ask is, so we have a structured approach, and it's around 8 or 9 sort of experiences that we'll talk through today. So the first one is about articulating a vision. And Stephen, I would love for you to kick us off today with answering that question. What is the experience that you have when you first go into a business or a company or have a conversation with a client and they're like, look, we want to work with you, and where do we begin? And how do you start the journey with them when it comes to like articulating a vision? Or does it start even before that?
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. Yes, I appreciate that. From a kind of perspective of articulating a vision and starting this process, I think the first thing I would say is a process. So this is all really today about developing a strategy, developing momentum to move an organization forward. And it might be solving a problem, it might be addressing an issue, whatever it might, but it's about driving the business forward. And for me, you can't really do that unless you've got a feel for where you want to take it and where you want to go. So the articulating the vision is the first thing that we would want to talk about. And what I mean by articulating a vision, because it's really easy to kind of have a vision of the future, but actually, unless you can articulate it, unless you can share it, unless you can bring people along with you, it's going nowhere. Yeah, it's just a vision, and it's quite lovely. I've got this lovely vision, but unless I can articulate it. And actually, the early kind of interventions, if you like, the starting point is really to try and understand what the client is trying to do, what the customer wants to do, where do they want to try and go, and then really it's about helping them put that into a story. And how do you tell the story of where you want to end up? And in my world, in the world of operational excellence, we're often trying to articulate a vision around continuous improvement, for example. And from where I see that is very much one of, I'll give you a story, I'll give you an analogy. I grew up in the steel industry. Steel industry is a very dangerous environment. So when it came to health and safety was embedded in everything we do. Okay, so every meeting you would go to, health and safety is on the agenda. If I want to bring into an organization a culture of continuous improvement, if my vision for my organization is a continually improving organization, I'd almost see it a little bit like health and safety. How do you build it into the DNA of the organization so that every meeting you go to, every interaction you go to, you have continuous improvement ingrained in that world? And it might be that your vision for your organization is to have continuous improvement as the DNA of your organization. And by starting to say things like that, you're starting to articulate what that looks like, what that feels like. So it is very much about kind of going, no, we don't just want to be good at continuous improvement. I want to ingrain it. I want to embed it. I want it to be in the DNA of my organization. I am now starting to articulate it. And it comes back, like I say, from my days when I used to work in the steel industry, and health and safety was in the DNA of the managers, of the organization, of the teams. And actually, if you can build operational excellence, continuous improvement into the fiber of the organization, then actually you're going to achieve great things. But we need to be able to articulate that. We need to be able to say to people what that looks like and what that feels like. So that'd be very much kind of my opening kind of gambit on that. I'll hand over to Avneet, actually.
Yeah. So it's interesting, right? So across the capability of all three of us, there's different types of consulting that we'll do. So I'm more in the strategy space. I have run large programs. Meehir, you've done IT consulting. But it all starts, so your initial question, so I think, Steve, you've done brilliantly to articulate the overarching vision of a business or where a business wants to head. But if you look at it and answer that second question you had, right, like where does this question of vision come in? Does it start before the engagement? Does it start during the engagement? Or does it start after? It's actually, there's a point in each of those. Each of them is a milestone in itself. So like the last assignment I was on, it was very clear that client needed help, but it wasn't clear what that help was going to enable. They wanted to scale. So there was a pre-conversation of me trying to read the brief and understand, okay, what is it that you want to do? And then when I met the client and started discussing some of the challenges and feedback that they'd had from their internal stakeholders, it became even clearer. So you're doing a pre-brief, then you're doing an actual brief. Then we agreed that the engagement would start. And when you get there, you're like, okay, so there's a lot more nuance to this. So there's almost 3 gates there. And then there's a midpoint of the engagement. So you're a portion of the way through the work and you're recalibrating that vision. And then when you hand off, because you're a consultant, you're not there forever. The whole goal is to improve the business and leave, or suggest improvements to the business and leave, depending on the sort of engagement you're on. You then leave the client with the vision as well. So it's an iterative process, right? And at each step, you start to bandy out more detail. That may be through cultural insights that you were talking about, Steve. It might be through it changes to the strategy in itself. It may be through forming a project off the back of that consultancy engagement, or it simply may be just clearer articulation of the challenges that business faces, and then they go on to make the changes themselves. So articulating vision, critical. Iterative process and many layers is probably what I'd add. So
Thank you, gents. No, very insightful. You know, as I'm listening to you both, you know, even the work that I do, yes, I've done consulting for IT and the services, but also I have a background, and we all have a background in leadership training and coaching. And I just want to speak to that for a moment. And it's not too dissimilar to what I would do when I'm speaking to a client or a group of coaching clients in a group dynamic, where we would talk about having a vision and going on further to, like, you know, what are the outcomes? What do you want? What are the desires you have? What are the end results that you have in mind? You know, as you were saying, you want to start with the end in mind, because that kind of is what pulls you forward. You've got to know where you want to go firstly. Bit of a curious question here before we move on to the next part. What would you say to people like, you know, in my experience, I've had, clients come to me, or potential clients come to me, and they say they want a certain outcome, they have a certain vision, but what they come to me with and what actually they truly want kind of gets revealed a little bit later down the line, or through a bit more of an explorative conversation. Have you found that to be true in your case? Like, they could be really adamant and enthusiastic, thinking that this is the vision that they want, but you kind of realize with a little bit of digging, it's actually not even slightly different, but significantly different. And there's actually more, there's a deeper truth that actually wants to be experienced. Have you found that is an experience that has been quite common or quite apparent even in a journey like this, typical journey like this?
That's a really good question. In the sense of, I think there's something there about the difference about what people want and what people need. Yeah. So, I want a really nice car, but do I need a really nice car is a different issue. And I think there's an element about kind of business strategy and articulating a vision and taking a company forward, where sometimes you can almost over vision and over strive, if that makes sense. A really strange thing to say, to over strive, but actually you're describing something that you kind of realize that it's something that would be nice to have rather than what you really need as an organization. And I think there's been a couple of instances recently where we've been working with organizations who are jumping on the AI fashion, if you like, at the moment. And it's like, we want it all. We want everything. We want to do everything we can possibly do in this space and in this field without actually necessarily reflecting on what do you actually need to do, and actually how do we get the best out of this world, and actually setting a vision that is achievable, that's realistic, that's actually within our grasp. Yes, we want to dream big, of course. Yes, we want to aspire to take over the world. But at the same time, there is an element of realism in articulating vision, because you've got to bring people with you, and people are not stupid. People will look at you and go, "That's just unrealistic. You know, what you're asking for there is beyond our ability." And you've got to push minds, you've got to stretch people and all the rest of it. But at the same time, you've got to bring people with you. And if people just look at you and go, "That is far-fetched, that's just science fiction, we'll never get there." So there has been a few instances lately where we have toned down, for want of a better word, the vision, purely in the sense to kind of help them then sell it to their colleagues and articulate it to their colleagues. Because actually, sometimes people are really good at coming up with some fantastic ideas, and then will struggle to sell it. And in essence, part of my role is to kind of just taper that a little bit, temper that a little bit, and make it a little bit more achievable. So that'd be kind of where I'd come from there. I don't know, Avneet, have you got a thought?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. So practically, from an approach perspective, I think that makes perfect sense. It also, as you say, Steve, depends on the sort of client that you have. Like, there's different types of leaders, right? There may be a leader who's very strategic in their thought process but struggles with implementation. One may be more implementation focused. One may be more data focused. So it's also about realizing the sort of client that you have so that you can talk their language. And then there's the more practical aspects of how do you break down a vision into structured bite-sized chunks that you can achieve, right? So it's not just the articulation of the vision, it's then going, okay, I know what I want to achieve over whatever the period is, 1 year, 6 months, 3 months, whatever it is. Two, it's then baselining where is that organization in its maturity and its capability, like you've mentioned. And so bringing them on the journey of how do you do that? Is it as simple as setting out like smart objectives? Or is it a bit more around a requirements analysis piece? So actually going like, you think you want this. I've used my analogy many times. I sold the M5. I didn't want it anymore, right? Why? Because it was a lovely car, but it burnt too fast, right? And yeah, it got me the street cred, but it actually didn't suit what I wanted going forward. And that's often what we find ourselves in as consultants, where it's like there may have been an old strategy that worked at a point in time in a business, but the macroeconomic landscape's changed, the goals of the business have changed, and the stakeholder on the other side is struggling to articulate it. So the external perspective is very helpful, but it also means you're coming in without bias. And then if you're using tooling to help achieve a common understanding of the current situation and why you've, one, been brought in, but two, what you want to achieve, as a consultant, we're normally there to advise and guide and steer and be the critical friend / strategic advisor, not always do the work. There may be times where we do a bit to demonstrate. But it's that, right? It's actually getting to that core realization that you've been brought in because there's complexity behind this. And how can I break this into a more understandable, easy to articulate set of challenges and achievable set of outcomes? That's where I go with that.
No, great stuff, guys. So what I'm hearing is, I think the conversation around the vision, the outcome, the end result, it is quite multifaceted. I think we don't want to say we expect our customers or potential customers and clients to know exactly. Sometimes they just have a feeling, and they're just following that feeling that, look, they want a perspective that they may have not had before. And I think, and it's, from the beginning, we're trying to be very curious, as Steve said in the previous episodes, where we're trying to be that critical friend to kind of not only, to bring you nuance, but also to guide you through getting to some level of clarity so we can start making some sort of movement towards some change that you're trying to experience. So, no, brilliant stuff, gentlemen. Thank you. So next question is, so the vision is obviously incredibly important. It's vital. But I also believe, we also believe that knowing where you're at right now, so what is your current situation, what is your current reality, is of equal, if not maybe even some greater importance in respect to the vision. Like, where are we at right now? And, and having that conversation. Stephen, why don't you kick us off? The question I really want to ask is, what have you kind of learned that if you don't have this part of the conversations nailed, it's all fun and games that we have a vision, but it can be quite costly if we don't know where we're actually at and what are the forces at work. So I know I've asked you a bit of an open-ended question, but yeah, I'd love for you to share a little bit more about what clients experience when a very honest conversation needs to happen around moving forward in respect to their vision.
Absolutely. The thing I find quite fascinating is if you go into an organization and you ask them, there's 100 people work in this company, and you go, how many of these 100 people are worrying about yesterday? And how many meetings have you been in where you're reviewing yesterday's performance and all that? And then you go, okay, cool. So how many people in the organization are worrying about today? And they go, well, we got the planners, they're doing their bit. We've got operations doing their bit. We've got a group of people worrying about today. And then when you start asking, well, okay, well, who's worrying about tomorrow? Who's looking ahead? Who in the team is paid to look into the future and to understand what's going on? And I'm always amazed how few people are looking into the future and how many people are looking in the past. And then when you ask them what their current situation is, they still don't know. And they've actually spent, there's that much resource worrying about yesterday, worrying about today, and they still don't really understand where their current situation is. So from my side of things, it's across the board. It's across all disciplines. It's understanding where you are financially, where you are with your customers, where you are in the market, where you are operationally, where you are on the technology curve, where you are on product launches. Every facet of the business, and I'm sure I've missed a few out there, in the sense of what is our current position, our current performance, our current understanding, our current strengths, our current weaknesses, and the current opportunities, the good old-fashioned SWOT analysis, the good old threats, we used to call them pest analysis, the old political, economic, social technology stuff, yep. So there's all these different tools, there's all these different MBA business tools that are out there. And I'm always surprised at the amount of resource we have about worrying about yesterday and today, and we still don't know what our current situation is. So it is a big part of this. You can't move forward unless you know where you are. Absolutely. It's like navigating somewhere, isn't it? It's like going from A to B. It's like me driving here today. How does my sat nav know how to get here if it doesn't know where I am at the moment? It's kind of as simple as that. So it is absolutely critical. We are in a world where the now is also moving at incredible speed. And actually, just because we understood the situation 6 months ago doesn't mean I understand the situation now. So even though for me, articulate the vision, that's the first step. Second step, to try and understand that current situation. It's not a job and done. It's an ongoing monitoring and monitoring and observation of that current situation because it's changing so quickly. And we need an agile strategy. We need an agile vision almost to kind of compensate for those kind of movements. But certainly from a kind of current situation position, you can't move forward if you don't know where you're starting from. But I am always stunned at the amount of resource that is spent looking backwards. And then you find somebody who is being paid a ridiculous amount of money as a director or as a leader, and you kind of go to them, okay, well, how much of your day have you spent looking forward? And he's gone, oh no, I was in the production meeting this morning, I was in the customer complaints meeting this afternoon, and you're sitting there thinking, well, none of that's forward looking. That's all reaction stuff. It's all operational reaction stuff. Right, so that would be my thought on that, sir.
Yeah, and I think, so that's a what a little bit. I talk about the how a bit more. So just articulate a bit more about that cross-functional way of working and looking at how a business operates, right? So regardless of whether you're a 100 people company, sometimes some of our clients cross into, public sector, and then mine personally have crossed into corporate. It's about also understanding what framework you're going to use to assess them. So there's the agility factor of we're in an environment where things are moving faster than they've ever moved before. There's an element of actually benchmarking that business against either the vertical that they're in, or let's, Steve, take some of our common examples. So we have public sector clients. A lot of my work in private sector is in fast-moving businesses, and they're diametrically opposite in the way they approach business problems. Public sector needs very deep level of structure and process, whereas private sector, particularly for food clients I have, moves at breakneck speed. But if you put a layer of, say, I've always used this throughout my career, strategy, people, process, and technology. So you made reference to some of the functions in there, like finance, etc. But if you are able to baseline those and say, okay, from a strategy perspective, how mature is your strategy? How mature are your processes? How are they operated? How good are your people? What does the technology enablement look like? And, every business is different. Some may be for 5 in one and a 1 in the other. That automatically starts to bring a little bit more tangible agreement as to what is achievable in the future, right? So we're suddenly starting to go a bit more into the technical aspects of how you run a diagnostic. But it's about driving out a common understanding of where you are right now versus where you want to get to. So.
Great stuff, Jen. So, in my experience also, I've noticed that one of the things that I've learned over the years, it's when we're addressing the current situation or the current reality in relationship to the vision, I think it's like both of you, gents, are saying, like, we're paying close attention to what's not working. And that's part and parcel of why you want change and why you want to actualize a vision. But one of the things I think is incredibly important to kind of get the foundation really strong in the beginning is also to acknowledge what is working already without even us doing our thing in it before we even get involved. Because I think that's incredibly important to say that actually, just because you may not feel that you're moving in the right direction because there's a lot of human emotion kind of clouding your perception of what the current situation is, because it just feels overwhelming, or like things are not moving, the efficiencies are not there, the bottom line is not there, all of the problems. It's either it can scale to it's not working well, to it feels quite catastrophic. I think it's incredibly important that when we have that conversation, we're also acknowledging that there is actually quite a lot of things you are doing well, because I think setting people off on that right path starts with acknowledging that actually what's been built already has done a lot of good, has actually taken them closer to things, but there are better way of doing things. That's something that's certainly very important when I am engaging with somebody or a group of people. Would you gents agree?
Absolutely. There is an element of, we kind of want to have this amazing vision and almost just chuck away all the good stuff, I mean, the world is moving, the world is changing, we know that. And suddenly, I want a piece of that. You think to yourself, well, you're a traditional business. There's using technology in a creative and innovative way, but I'm not just going to stop doing what I'm doing and suddenly become a tech giant overnight. It's kind of, why would I sacrifice all the good that I have done over the last, say, 30 years just to jump on a fashion, jump on a fad, or jump on something that is unproven and unstable? So I think there's an element of not wanting to chuck away all that good experience, all that good knowledge, all that good learning, and actually, how do you move your organization forward into the 21st century and build on all that good stuff that you've done. Absolutely. I think it's a shame almost when you see established businesses who don't change. So you've got a business, and basically technology passes them by, and suddenly they're out of business because they haven't reacted to the world. Fine, that's that's terrible to see, and it's sad to see, and you feel you've lost something if you see somebody disappear like that. But the flip side, I think, is also true when you see somebody disappear because they do something completely different. Now, there are some funny stories in society. You've only got to look at Nokia. Because I mean, my understanding is, Nokia used to make rubber products. It was Wellington boots, wasn't it, that they were famous for? And so that's not to say we can't go from making Wellington boots to making mobile phones. But a part of me feels that's the exception, not the rule. That's the rare novel story almost, as opposed to this idea of, well, all this good stuff that we've got, we'll chuck away. Now, that said, of course, intellectual property, our ability to think, is something that is transferable. So they may be that we branch out into something completely different and we have a vision of going to play over in this space over here, and we're going to take with us all our knowledge, skills, behaviors, competencies, whatever we want to call it. But a part of me feels quite sad when we just bin all our 30 years of experience just to jump on something that we think is where the future is going to be. But that's a personal thing. That's pure, that's purely personal. I feel that actually we should be building constantly, not tearing down. But that's a personal thing.
Yeah, so that's interesting, Steve, because there's 2 to 3 parts to this I'd like to articulate. So one's about the fact that you don't have to rip out what's going well. You can build on top, right? So that may be through an M&A play. It may be through a new innovation or R&D center or R&D based project. It may be through redirecting a small amount of the workforce on an MVP or proof of concept, right? But that, as you say, can be built upon the solid foundations of a set of processes or a set of automation or a set of, this cycle or way of working really suits us. If it's a more digitally orientated business or a newer, smaller business, they will tend to do iterative cycles anyway. Whereas if you're a more heavy industry manufacturing business, they're also learning that, you can optimize line management so much, you can optimize production so much, you can optimize people deployment so much. But at that point, once you've done those core things, you may need to experiment with the next set of products. And you've got many manufacturers that have moved from X product to Y product, subcontracted. So there's an element of that. There's also an element of what constitutes risk in a specific situation. So, you look at margin challenge environments at the moment. And if we look at the UK government and what's happened in hospitality, let's just use that as an example. A lot of people have pivoted right out of shipping food, and they've moved into hospitality consulting because they know the business. So it's understanding the context behind the shift as well in thinking and going, actually, what level of risk is right for this client? It may be ripping up their entire business model, which is sad, as you say, or it may be building. But often that's where our value comes in, right? It's you don't have to tear this whole thing down. You may need to stop operational production in this part of your business, but you can redeploy these people or these processes in a more effective way over here. And that's where being an advisor comes in, because all of us, as we mentioned on the last podcast, have got different lived experiences, small businesses, large businesses, the one we run together now, where we're sat here, and you're all constantly tailoring the strategy. And I think that's the thing to take away here, right? It's the business market is moving faster. Our clients are maybe late, maybe early, depending on where the cycle is, understanding that a business agility is not negotiable anymore, right? It's so important to have it. And then that the risk factor of what constitutes real risk is dependent client to client. So I hope that helps.
Great stuff, gents. So ultimately what we're saying is, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, just change the bathwater. and you don't need consultants for that. But you can if you want. It could be really nice, really pure, exotic bathwater. Excellent. No, and look, I think it's important to. I think both. I love Avneet's perspective where, look, we can move pieces around, we can do adjustments, and I also, love what Stephen is saying around. Yeah, I know it's personal that you shouldn't have to chuck away something that's working, and I even if it's personal, I think that is that's wisdom working with all the industry you've seen come and go in your time, and even what you've seen in the experience.
Yeah.
Like I think that's also, this may be a tangential conversation that we can have another day, but I think building on what you have and not chucking it away is a sustainable thing to do, right? Even as in nature or whatever, things get reused, things get recycled, and the ecosystem kind of serves itself. And we're also about creating really nourishing ecosystems in business as well. And what we're saying when we're talking about the vision and we're talking about current reality is making sure that we do the best thing we can with the resources we already have. And I think that kind of brings me quite nicely to the next step in our process, where we complete, this might sound a bit jargony, but a gap analysis. So my understanding of a gap analysis is just the discrepancy between where you want to go and where you are right now, and what are the differences, what is it going to take to close that gap, essentially. Avneet, why don't you kick us off in terms of, in a typical gap analysis? I know you've worked at quite, corporate level, from a startup all the way to corporate, right? So you run a very specific GAMU, but you also do small business.
Yeah.
So I would love for you to speak to a little bit of both around when a typical gap analysis experience that you have when you're speaking with potential clients and customers.
Yeah, sure. So I think, look, at the corporate level, the benefits you normally have start with the fact that there is not an avalanche, but there is a good amount of information available at your fingertips, whether that's data, whether that's financial, whether that's strategy. Yeah, it might be a little bit out of date. Yes, it may have a slight bias to it, but you already have a starting point. So typically in more corporate engagements or in corporate environments, you'll find you're not spending as much time mapping the as is or the where I am right now. You may be spending time interpreting that and ensuring it's correct, but you won't be spending as much time getting that initial vision. You just need to sanity check it, right? And then you go through the steps we talked about, right? Like, what is the vision? What version of tooling do you want to use? Is it fishbone analysis? Is it smart objectives? Is it iterative cycles of trying to get to X point? What are the KPIs you want to get behind it, et cetera, et cetera? There's a bunch of methods to move to the next step. When you're working in smaller environments, and we can use the example of this consultancy business, right? Like, Steve, you've been self-employed for 25 years. You do a mix of training, certification, and consulting. I come from a consulting background. I run 3/4 SMEs, and I still found a gap in where we wanted to go, right? Because I'm like, actually, look, we've got a shared set of capability here that's got a unique value proposition out to the market. And that was totally through conversation. There was no mapping of anything. It was just conversation going, we've got value here we can bring with our lived experiences of 20 years each. Not many consultancies can cross strategy, IT, training and development, certification with the genuine level of heavy hitting experience that we've got across startup, SME, and corporate. And that came more from an incremental conversation, looking what was out in the market. So there's an element of market research. We sat at the Nook. This is both a production kitchen for our food business and also the consulting business. And I used the same steps when we launched Bollywood Bites, right? It was, let's go out and do some market research. Let's see where the gap is in the market. And that was much more relatable to anyone watching this podcast. You go to Ali Pali, you go to different food markets, you look at the food provision, you look at the pricing, You look at the quality of the product, you eat the product, you feel the quality of the product, or sometimes not in my children's case, a few days after. But that in itself gives you a level of insight. So it can be structured, it can also be more informal, but that framework for me is still there, right? Like, what is your USP? What's your unique value proposition? Or, what are you selling, unique selling proposition, right? Like, what makes you different from the competition? And what are you really about? What is your values? And that part is often missed, right? And so that's how I would look at it. It's less, yes, the frameworks, you scale them and make them more formal as you go up in the food chain in terms of size of an organization or structure of an organization. But the premise is still the same. As you say, where am I now? Where do I want to get to? That you need to be humble enough to understand that you might not always like that answer that comes out, right?
Yeah.
But you have to go through that process. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Absolutely. I'll say something quickly, Stephen. Like, I think it's incredibly important what you're saying. I think we want to make sure that we're asking the question where we're at in relationship to where we want to go, like, all the time, as much as possible. And yeah, it can be quite confronting to kind of realize, oh, we're not on track. I know actually we've not been on track since the beginning of the engagement. But there's nothing wrong in that. That's quite natural sometimes. So that shouldn't mean, being discouraged or deterred or just make a claim or assert that, oh, this is not working. And I think that's also the reason why we exist and why we're there, is to make sure that, look, to support you to stick, sometimes you have to stick it out a little bit to see some serious wins come through. And just like with everything that you've done in your small business, all the way to scaling a startup, you have to keep having the conversation, but also making sure that, okay, we're closing the gap. Maybe there's multiple gaps. Some are being closed like that, and some are taking a lot longer. It's constantly having that evaluation. And I think that's really what we're always trying to support clients with, to make sure that they don't lose sight or feel discouraged on the path to change. So just wanted to say that, and hopefully that gives you a little bit more kindle for what you're about to say, Stephen.
Hope so.
Yeah, no, I think
No, I was thinking more about it from almost a practical position.
Sure.
Thinking from a point of view of how do we do a gap analysis, and how do we, and a part of me feels that actually these things can feel quite big. So if I've got a vision that I'm going to create a new market opportunity, or I'm building continuous improvement into the DNA of the organization, or I'm going to merge with this company and we're going to create this new entity and go forward, these things feel really big. And I think when we get into the gap analysis, one of the things I kind of like to do is to break it up into themes, call them work streams, whatever we want to call them, but actually creating a series of almost headings where I can hang the gap analysis off. One of them could be values, for example. So, have we got shared values? Have we got culture? There might be something there around, from a leadership, there might be a theme on, do we have the right leadership in this new strategy? Are there things we need to change there? We might have a theme around processes, and do we have the right processes in place? There might be a theme around technology. And then once we've got these themes, we can then start thinking about what are the key steps that we need to start doing to bridge that gap. And I think that feels to me slightly more tangible and kind of help a client grasp some of these more larger, complex kind of visions. Because even though they might be a small business, even though they might be a small entity, they will have big ideas, they will have big plans, and they can be hugely intimidating when you first try and think, well, Steve says I've got to do a gap analysis. So what's this? And actually, well, let's break that. Let's break it down, and let's break it down into 5 or 6 different areas, and then we can start to think about, well, where are you in that position? So if we were trying to open up an international market, let's say your organization has been a domestic UK-based organization for many, many years. You've got a fantastic track record, and you're deciding to export your product over the water to France, Germany, wherever it might be. or even island. And you start thinking to yourself, well, how on earth do I do that? Because there's going to be themes around exporting and what that means. There'll be themes around logistics. There'll be themes around manufacturing to new demands. There'll be things like language barriers and all this type of stuff. So many different things to think about and consider. And actually being able to pragmatically and practically develop some themes will help you do that gap analysis and will help you understand the steps that you need to start putting in place to move you towards your vision. So I'd be very much one quite practical. And I think a key one for me is how we measure the success of our kind of strategic kind of document. And one of the themes might be kind of how do I measure not just the financial success, but maybe cultural success. So if I am bringing two organizations together, how do I know that culturally they have worked, they have fitted, they have become more than the sum of their parts? And actually that could be, for example, one of the streams, one of the themes that we're worrying about. So I don't want us to get too hung up when we're working on things like this with just the hard finances of a change, of a strategy. And actually we kind of put in all these metrics and all these ratios to make sure that financially we're achieving, because in many ways that's a given in you know, from a successful point of view. I think there's also that element of, especially if you're bringing organizations together, culturally, what are you creating? Because you know, we all know that culture is just made up of the people that are in the room. And actually, as you bring more people in, you start to change that culture, and that culture starts to move. And what does good look like is part of what this is all about.
Amazing. Thank you, Stephen. You know, what I'm hearing, you know, when you're sharing it kind of goes back to what we were discussing when we started off the conversation around the vision. And actually, it's very similar to the work that I would do with a one-on-one client as a single person who has a vision for life and whatever, and is to break down the vision into themes. Because one of the things is, look, we may have a vision, but we know that we can't carry the whole vision with us all the time. It's inhumane to think that. It's not humanly possible to carry the whole vision all of the time. I think it's part of the process when someone goes on a journey with any of us is breaking it down so your mind, your mental faculties can kind of grasp it, so that because I think the human factor is so important in this, because none of us are saying that, you know, we're not dismissing any of this. This is vital. We want this to be a sustainable experience, and we absolutely want you to actualize the vision to achieve your whatever you consider what is success. But generally, the only way that can happen in the most sustainable way is to make sure that emotionally the regulation is happening. And generally, the best way is to break things down into manageable, bite-sized pieces. It might sound really cliche, but it's the truth. We've known that on a personal level and seen that time and time again. And even for an organization, it even has deeper complexities, because cultures are in itself bodies of emotion, and you know they're a living organism, and it's making sure that we create the sustainability around that to make sure that the power is not essentially given to the overwhelm or the emotions, but we're creating a level of objectivity to realize that yes, we can keep moving forward regardless of, you know, human experiences we're having. And the one way of addressing that is to chunk things down so we can kind of move forward. And like certain things would have a little bit of energy given to it. One theme would be focused on initially, and then we'll kind of take some energy out and put some more energy. So we'll do that, you know, in an iterative way, in an incremental way. And that kind of leads on nicely to this next question around time and the importance of time, and how time plays quite a significant factor in an engagement. Now, you know, we're not planning to be there forever. Even if you wanted us to be, that's really kind of you. But we also want to be empowering you, and part of that empowerment is to be like, okay, what can we achieve in a agreed upon unit of time and a time scale? And I have a very nuanced perspective on this before I hand over to each of the gents. I think it's important to have deadlines, to have a ballpark. A part of the vision is to achieve something in a certain amount of time. I think that's important. It creates, and then, urgency and an energetic force that you need to move things forward and to drive the initiative, the change, and the movement towards the vision. But I also know that I think that time needs to be held softly and not in a hard way, because there's forces at work, that there's market forces, there's environmental forces, there's people forces, there's all these forces at work. So we have to use time in a very specific way. Even when I'm working with somebody, like, honor the timescales you set for yourself, but also carry it with, like, it doesn't mean disaster or failure of a project just because the deadline wasn't met. So that's kind of me when I'm working with someone personally. But in an organization or a business, I know it's slightly different. It's a different beast entirely. So I'd love to know both of you guys' sort of perspective on that, on your years of experience running. Running the sort of spectrum of businesses you have. So Avneet, to you.
Yeah, sure. So whether you run a business or whether you're part of a business, you would have experience being part of a project, right? Like, so a business in itself can be a project. It can be a series of projects. And if you're part of an organization, you may be tracking the P&L of a project. You may be delivering a small part of a project, or you may be managing a project or set of projects, depending on what you're doing, right? And so this element of time is relative is really important, because it's relative to the size of the problem that you're trying to fix or the service you're trying to give. It's relative to the complexity. And I've come, before the strategy work, I did a lot of work in technology and project and program management as well. You have that the typical classic triangle of time and cost and quality. They all are as important as each other. So if you're short on time, you may cut on quality. If you're short on quality, you may cut on cost, right? And there's an impact on all of those. So it's about getting that baseline agreement with your client of what constitutes good in each of those, right? So for an enterprise or a large company, change is inherently more complex and it takes longer. For an SME, it can still be as complex, but they may realize a larger amount of change in a smaller amount of time because they have a motivated project team that are frankly remunerated on that change, right? Or they may need someone like us, an accelerator, to come in and go actually focus on that. And then the rest will come over a longer term roadmap, right? So I think what I'm saying here is time is important. It's relative to complexity and it's relative to the type of problem you're solving. Is it a strategy problem? Is it a culture problem? Is it a hard numbers problem? And then the other thing I would say is also, it's very much based on this premise of value to that client, right? Like, what does that client perceive as a good time scale? And they'll have their own criteria underneath that. So hope that helps. Yeah. So
It's a great question. I'm going to tell a story, and it's, and I'm not going to do it justice. I'm not going to do it justice because it's kind of just come to me in the sense of there is a famous case study. There's a famous case study that all Harvard kind of MBA kids are shown, and it's the case study of Matsushita versus Phillips. So Matsushita was basically, he started out life as a slave in Japan, and he was trying to create home appliances that would make a slave's life easier. So things like irons and stuff like that. Now he's existing at the same time that Philips, who we know for light bulbs, is knocking about. Anyway, eventually Matsushita gets his freedom and he builds himself the company. Now we would know the company here in the UK as Panasonic, so that's the company brand we would recognize. But Matsushita is if you like, the parent company. And Matsushita was an interesting character because when he created his business, he created a 250-year plan. His strategy was 250 years. And they only deviated from it in the 1990s when they had the big financial crashes in Asia. But he had mapped out products, technology, growth of his organization, markets over 250 years. And Philips was happening at the same time, couldn't string together a 5-year plan, let alone a 200. And it's a classic case study. But there was an interesting interview. There's a business professor from Harvard called John Cotter who studied this guy. And John interviewed him before he died. Now, this Matsushita at the time, I think, was something like 107. He was that type of age. And he just set up the school to train civil servants in the Japanese government. And the goal was to so his vision that he articulated was, I am going to eradicate corruption in the Japanese civil service. And John Cotter famously asked him a question. Well, look, Mr. Matsushita, you're famous for your long vision, your long plan for Matsushita, your own company. You're 100 plus years old. How long is it going to take this school to eradicate corruption in the Japanese civil service? And Matsushita's sitting there and he kind of looks at him dead in the eye, and without really blinking or moving, he said, 400 years. And he goes, and Cotter, who's an American professor, grows up in the capitalistic capital of the world in kind of, in Harvard and all the rest of it. He's just just cannot comprehend that somebody can have a 400-year vision for a problem. And it's a fascinating story. It's a fascinating case study. I'd encourage anybody to look it up. What is interesting is that is one complete extreme. And then I have clients who then who cannot think beyond 3 months. That actually the quarter, because they're on a reporting quarter. So every quarter, this small SME who is part of a much larger organization has to report every quarter on performance and cannot think beyond 3 months. And the world they're in is not that particularly volatile. It's all, Christmas comes every year at the same time. It's a very predictable business. So I think it's fascinating, our concept of time, how we understand time, how we appreciate time. And I think from a strategy point of view, being realistic with what we can achieve with the people we've got, the resources we've got, the market that we're in, the opportunities we've got. We have these fantastic visions, and we have to appreciate that they're not necessarily going to happen overnight. We have to think about how much effort and time this is going to be. And actually, nobody's going to give us anything. We've got to go out there and get it. And because of that, this takes a bit of time. Now, I've always found the best in our world, in a Western society, in a capitalistic culture that we're in, once we start thinking beyond 3 to 4 years, it becomes quite problematic. It becomes quite problematic. But that's because our whole reporting structures, our financial structures are built in a way that looking beyond that is quite a challenge. So often some of the best strategies, documents that I've seen are a 3 to 5 year horizon. And there is a reason for that. And they seem to work the best. I think the key thing is about flexibility. It's about agility. Gone are the days that I can sit back at the turn of the century with Matsushita and write a 250-year plan and not deviate from it. We have, if you look at what's happened in the last 5 years in the West with things like COVID and then some of the changes that we've had in government, some of the wars we're having in Europe at the moment, these are throwing things at organizations which you would never scenario plan for. You would never go, ooh, I think that's going to happen. So actually that agility, that flexibility in our strategy is key, and flexibility in time is key as well.
Amazing stuff. Yeah, I think we can get wedded to timelines, and it actually causes more harm than good sometimes, because any change is down to so many factors, from a global level, sort of organizational, right down to an individual within an organization. So I think, as I was saying earlier, and so eloquently, both of the gents kind of extrapolated on the question of the importance of time. I think we have to hold it with respect that in relationship to change and transformation is, yes, how long is a piece of string, but it shouldn't be the ultimate focus. The focus always has to be on what is the vision and where we're at. And then quite naturally, if we're in alignment with a lot of things and we're consistently asking ourselves this question, the time thing, I think, kind of takes care of itself to a certain degree.
Yeah.
Getting a little bit philosophical here, but it is what it is. So speaking of time, so naturally, if we do want to stick to timelines, and it's hard and fast to a certain degree, and we want to respect the hard and fast, there's nothing wrong in it, and we take it out from the existential and philosophical and ground it a little bit. The next question is about creating the journey, like Matsushita, the 250-year vision, aka a roadmap.
Yeah.
We're not going to be talking like in 100 years, century levels of roadmaps, but essentially, what are we looking to experience with a client when we're fleshing out the roadmap between where we are right now and where we want to be? So what the vision is and what the current reality is. Why don't you kick us off, Avneet?
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? So, Steve, you mentioned cycles in the Western society of working on a financial cycle of a year and then a quarterly report and then a month by month revenue recognition, right? So I think it's important if we go, and I'm just restating some of the stuff we've said previously around like, it's relative. You need to understand how mature your organization is, what its key strengths and weaknesses are, to then build a plan of action. You can call it a roadmap, but it's effectively a plan of action that you feel you can achieve in a set period of time, whilst accounting for a degree of complexity, understanding the capability of your team, where you may need to outsource, so people like us to come in and steer and guide, or an agency to come and do some implementation work. And then also what value you're going to realize back of it. And that roadmap may be small. So in the sense of the food startup, in the first 3 months, I run an incubation cycle. I just want to understand, have I got a business idea here that's going to fly? Yes. Okay. Now we're going to give another 3-month cycle of brand development and create a product. That was me and my wife. 2 years ago, we now have award-winning business, which has won 6 awards in the food industry, because we spent the requisite amount of time going slowly in that agreed period to build a product. So it's not always about speed, right? That's the other thing I want to say. So you, Steve, you mentioned these 250-year roadmaps. Absolutely difficult to do now. Maybe some of those ideas still exist and are being executed, but very difficult to do now. But if you create a roadmap and you get a level of agreement and buy-in from your organization, whether it's 3 people or 300,000 people, there's a stonewall guarantee you're going to achieve something. Whereas if you have a nice strategy on the wall, that's 5 years in with lots of themes, but no one's bought into it, the CEO is just top-downing into your organization and you're going to achieve very little of that. So this is the bit where I call, like, use the startup experience, so like bottom up. It's not just top down, it's bottom up, and going, where do we actually calibrate our experience? What do we buy into doing, and what do we think we can do? We might be wrong, but we think we can do this, and then might hit some snags in the wall, and this end solution isn't quite what we thought it would be. But you've built that roadmap, you've built agreement, you've built consensus, you've created a direction. You've not just created clouds on a wall, you've created a direction and you're heading in that direction. That is the importance of creating a roadmap. And if I layer on like my personal approach, I've always used strategy, people, process, technology. You've done the strategy. We talked the first hour and a bit of this podcast, we've talked about strategy development. This is now stretching your legs into execution, right? Like this is the bit where you're going, okay, now I'm going to achieve this thing. Or we're going to go hell for leather, or we're going to go slow, depending upon what we've agreed. But we're going to go, and you're effectively creating the arrow and the direction. And this is where often people fall down the most, because they think they want something, they think they can do it, Then they start doing it and they go, I can't do this. Well, this is much more complex than I thought it would be. Or, oh no, the world has changed so much. And so it's really important you keep, whilst there's a lot of complexity underneath, you keep this light and agile in today's environment. So that 250-year roadmap is just not relevant today. It's very difficult to do that sort of work today. And we can talk a bit about some of the factors, but that I would almost say like, this is the bit you're creating the momentum. This is the word I've been looking for, right? Like create momentum, provide direction, let said business accelerate and achieve. It's really where I'm going with it. So
I think we can't ignore the importance of structure as well. So in the sense of everything you've said there, my friend, is spot on. And what I would add to that is this idea of a good roadmap will have some structure. Now, in my world of kind of operational excellence and problem solving, we're full of structures. We're full of kind of tools and techniques that kind of, whether it's 8D problem solving or DMAIC or kind of plan, do, check, act, there's all these different structures in place. But in essence, you're absolutely right. As you move into the world of execution, you need a plan and you need a structure. And a good roadmap is really a really good plan, let's be honest, isn't it? It's kind of go, right, day one, these are the things I'm going to do. Next week, these are the things I'm going to do. And the week after that, and whether we've broken it up into themes or areas or buckets or kind of specialist subjects, whatever we're really looking at, it's about creating that action plan under all of those headings. So, if we were talking about bringing two organizations together and we're looking at that cultural fit, there is almost that feel of, okay, well, what's the first thing we're going to do? Do we need to do some sort of benchmarking exercise to understand what the current culture is now we've brought those two organizations together? And is it what we want it to be? And how do we make those changes? And you're absolutely right. If you're creating that kind of food business, and you didn't just suddenly buy a van and pull up and start cooking some chips. There's a little bit more thought goes into it than that, especially to be an award-winning food kind of organization. So you can't just wing it. These things are well planned, well thought out, and the time element, like I say, comes in a little bit, because certainly in my world, if we've got a problem and we just jump straight to a solution, more often than not, it's the wrong solution and we waste a lot of time redoing it. Yeah. Whereas if we spend a bit of time thinking about what the problem is, understanding the root cause of those problems, and then jumping into the solution, it's more likely going to be right. Yeah. So exactly the same when it comes to that roadmap. So just really building on what you were saying there, my friend, in the sense of the importance of it, and then actually thinking about that structure that we can add and bring to the table through, again, years and years of expertise on actually how do you move from A to B when you're already at B in your head. Mentally, you're at the end of your journey. You've done the vision, you've created it, you're well into it, but the rest of you and your organization is back here where we are today. How do we jump forward? It is incremental, and it might be 1 or 2 increments, it might be 100 increments, but a good plan, a good roadmap is a series of steps. It's a journey, not just the destination.
No, awesome stuff. It's interesting because I think the structure is incredibly important. It gives we talked about, having the themes, articulating the vision, also articulating where we're at, what the current reality is, what the current situation is, breaking down the themes that are apparent with a gap analysis. If time's a real element, it generally always is to a certain degree, incorporating all of that. And then I think the roadmap really kind of gives a way to actually create all of that, makes it a little bit tangible. You can actually truly grasp it. So we're always constantly striving to have as much grasp of what is ethereal and in our imagination and in our aspirations and whatever, and make it grounded into something that can be actualized. And the roadmap allows you to do that quite powerfully. And a good roadmap just, for me, it would remove any sort of reservations or fears or psychological tension or any sort of
To reassurance.
absolutely, which I think is really important. It's like a roadmap is exactly that. If you can see your route, like we're in the Google Maps app, and you know your route, you can see where you're going, and if you need to take a ferry, you can take a ferry. If you need to take a shuttle, you can take a shuttle. If you need to take a flight, take a flight.
Yeah.
So at least you know you're not coming into many surprises. I say that, but it also gives us the opportunity to, if there are surprises, if there are unexpected things along the way, we have a place that we can come back to if we are taken off track a little bit. I think that's why the roadmap is also there, because it allows us to adjust appropriately, because the route is not going to be one straight line. It never is.
No.
It never really is. And we all know that personally, and when we're working with the people that we work with and the organizations that we worked with. So it also allows us to have a little bit of creative license in terms of, addressing obstacles that are definitely going to happen along the way. But the structure, the roadmap essentially is also the soil in which creativity can happen in the face of challenges and obstacles. So that's why the roadmap experience is incredibly important part of the journey that we take clients on. So amazing stuff, gentlemen. So this question is quite interesting now, the next one, because I think it's a very specific question. So I'm intrigued to explore it with you gents, because these two gents have put the questions down here, rightfully so.
Giving away our secret.
Yeah. No, we are. We we don't want to gatekeep too much. Like we're living in a world where I think sharing is important.
Yeah.
But also we want you to feel that, we're not trying to gatekeep anything, because we want to share our experiences and our talents and just support people, fellow consultants also, just as much as our customers. So this question, you guys, you're talking about local versus international consideration. Now, when I think about environments, cultures, and things like that. Speak more about that and why you've actually. I think this is a great thing to actually include as a specific part of the journey mapping, and in our approach. So I would love to hear a little bit more about that, Avneet.
Yeah. So, if I look at some of my clients, I've had, whilst working in employed roles in consulting, I've had either very local clients, or maybe councils, and then very London-centric organizations that work primarily in the UK. I've done global corporate roles. My last consultancy assignment was a UK&I business. And it's slightly broader than just local versus international considerations, but really what we're saying here is when you're creating a roadmap, what level of complexity are you planning for? What sort of business are you planning for? What sort of project is it? So is it an M&A initiative? Is it a market entry, so new product launch? Is it a go-to-market strategy for a product that already exists, but we're putting it into a new market, right? And it's about that. It's about trying to understand here, have a roadmap, team are bought into it. I know, as you say, the road may be gnarly to get there, right? But what can I do to smooth out the road and anticipate the complexity in advance so that my team of people can swim in the water like swans whilst actually paddling underneath furiously, right? But just giving them that channel and trying to smooth it out as much as possible. And I think that's really what, this is about here. It's about complexity in a business environment that is inherently becoming more complex with legislation, compliance. I mean, if we look at just running a consultancy, we're, ICO registered, you have GDPR regulations, we have data protection policies, we have sustainability policies, we have carbon neutral targets. The list is, you have flexible working. All of the considerations are on a micro consultancy like we do. And you scale that to mid-size or corporate, and that is exponentially a bigger part of your business as you grow, right? And I think what we're saying here is that there's this element of culture, of like the way business is done in the UK, probably a bit more slower, relationship-based than, say, the US, where it's inherently relationship-based, but it's extremely fast. And entrepreneurship is more respected and more common than in the UK. Whereas in Europe, it's much more, when I worked my last corporate job, I remember going to a country visit in Spain, and they literally stopped work for long lunch break, and then you'd go to the bar after. But the conversation would be around work in between, right? That period, and like you were socialized with your colleagues, and that was the way business was done. So I think this is about an awareness piece. If you're a leader, you're running a business, small or large, what is the culture of operation? Where are you today? And if you want to go bigger, you need to open your mind to it, right? That's really what this is about. So I think local versus international is more of that prompt of actually just saying, look, you want to expand, you want to create footprint, absolutely. But this is much more about like understanding the nuance of how to do business and how to execute. I think that's really this is where we're going in the conversation. So.
Yeah, very true, very cool. The other angle I could give you on this, Meehir, is this idea of how we view local and national and international. So, you have a business here, and we're in Watford. We're on the outskirts of Watford.
Yeah.
And in essence, if we were buying supplies for this business and we were selling from this business, we would be selling in this kind of locality.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how, as organizations have changed over the years, their definition of local, what that really means. So when I talk to a procurement manager for an automotive company, an automotive supplier, he was saying, well, our supply base isn't just within 50 miles of the factory. Our supply base is Eastern Europe, and Eastern Europe is local. North Africa is local. So even though we talk about this kind of local and international, we have a very different perception on what is close and what is far. And I think what's interesting when we're trying to build and develop a strategy and a vision, it's almost feeling like what feels close, what feels local, and actually what feels an awful long way away. And I will share a story. It's both comical and depressing at the same time. And I, no, I had a client years ago, and they made furniture that would appear in a particular, in those days, catalogue. Now it's all done online. But they would manufacture cheap and cheerful furniture for this said catalogue, who shall remain nameless. And this was made out of chipboard. Now, what's quite interesting is there are, not anymore, in the UK, we do not manufacture chipboard. There used to be one or two manufacturing sites. We don't really do it anymore. Chipboard as a product is manufactured abroad and brought in. And historically, they would always buy their chipboard from basically former kind of Russian Soviet Union territories. So Latvia, Lithuania, the northern Baltic countries inherited an awful lot of the Soviet wood technology. And they are famous for, if you like, things like manufacturing chipboard. And we were buying chipboard in from those places. But somebody somewhere on a spreadsheet went, ooh, it's a bit expensive buying it from Latvia, which is kind of on our doorstep. Let's buy chipboard in from China. And so overnight, they shut down all their contracts with their local supplier in Latvia and moved their shipments and their orders to China. Now, they understood that it's a 6-week lead time, that actually, okay, we're going to have a warehouse in Liverpool to hold trailers of this stuff coming in. So we understand that, but we've costed it, and it is absolutely fine. And the first shipment came in, and everybody's happy. The furniture's being manufactured, all the rest of it. Second shipment comes in a few months later, everybody's happy. Third shipment doesn't arrive. And it's like, where's the third shipment? Well, China's going, we sent it. There it is, it's on the day. Turns out that pirates off the east coast of Africa had basically captured the ship and were holding the crew hostage. And it went on for about 3 or 4 months. Well, of course, there's no chipboard now coming into this factory. They can't source it in the UK because there's no UK kind of production. So they then ring up their suppliers in Latvia. Now, what did they do? Yes, of course you can have our chipboard, but you're going to pay for it and absolute double the price. And so they were, for a period of time, manufacturing furniture at a fraction. Well, they weren't making any money at all, but actually it was costing them to put it into the supply chain. But it is interesting that they just found, you know what, we'll go over there and we'll buy it over there. And we have this international contract. Now, you've got issues with time zones, you've got issues with languages, and we don't always fully appreciate the hidden costs of moving a long way, whether you're moving your product a long way or whether your suppliers are a long way. And actually, there's something about local versus international, there's something about close and far, which needs to be considered. It needs to be thought about because there are so many hidden costs. And it will vary from business to business, whether you're a service or whether you're a product or whatever you're doing. It will vary enormously. But the concept of staying close, even though it might be more expensive, actually there are so many hidden costs that we don't fully understand. Going far can be a real challenge for us and a real issue. So again, when we're developing our roadmap, if you think about, we've articulated the vision, we've understood the current situation, we've completed that gap analysis, we've worked out how long it's going to take us to do this. Now we're starting, we've created the roadmap, we've got all the steps in place. Actually, we've got to start thinking about some of these nuances. And some of these nuances are a little bit, could be technology nuance. This particular one we've picked up on is actually this local versus international. For me, it's about close versus far away and the hidden costs of being far away.
Very deeply insightful. When I listen to yours, gents, responses to this question, it's if I zoom out to the specifics of being local and international, I think for me, it's, are we making, or is the client making informed decisions and choices as per the several steps before, or is this like are they a little bit trigger happy with the choice making, and is there some impatience coming in? Is there some insecurity, or is there some sort of, are we losing sight of where we're actually trying to go because we're in a rush or something, or we're saving some time or we're saving some money or whatever, but actually it's having the awareness that what is the gain and the loss from a certain decision. Just because it may be cheaper, it might not necessarily be economical in the long run. There is a payoff somewhere, and vice versa. Like, where are we actually not taking the risks and where we could be losing out, and actually having the awareness and thinking out the decision and the action we're going to take. If I had to kind of zoom out a little bit and try to make it a little bit global around the decision-making process in relation to any sort of context, in relationship to the assignment, to the vision. So brilliant stuff. So Steve recapped the whole thing. And now we're at a place like, let's say we're ready to go. We've already started now. Yeah. We're on the journey. Yeah. And ultimately, over time, something in the coaching world I've heard of is there's a half-life of enthusiasm, where it's a finite resource. Enthusiasm, energy is, to a certain degree, in humans and in group of humans, is a finite resource to a certain degree. And one of the most important parts that I think we play, critical, I think, is making sure that momentum is kept up. Right? It's absolutely vital that when we're closing that gap, the only way that happens is that we're making our choices, we're deciding what we're deciding, and when we're acting upon those decisions and choices and maintaining the momentum so we can actualize the vision. So I'd love to hear from both of you. What are your experiences? What are some of the hows, the technical aspects of maintaining momentum? And your own sort of wisdom that you've gleaned from the whole experience of why maintaining momentum is absolutely vital, and it's actually it's a lifeline for the steps prior to it, all the 6 or 7 steps prior to it. Steve, I'd love for you to go first.
Probably give me the hardest one of the day, actually, maintaining it. But that's okay. I guess for me, the kind of maintaining momentum, let's go back a step. There's how we can help someone maintain momentum, but then there's how they can help themselves. So I'll start with how they can help themselves. I think when you're doing that gap analysis, when you're developing the action plan for that roadmap, I think there are going to be different types of solutions to problems. So there's things you're going to do. And some of those things are going to be really easy to do. And some of those things are going to be really hard to do. And some of those things are going to have quite a high impact on the strategy. And some of them are going to have quite a low impact on the strategy. So if you can start to imagine a grid where I've got things getting easier to do and harder to do, having a higher impact and a lower impact on my document. So when I'm looking at my roadmap, there are going to be what I would call some quick wins. So these are easy to do, and they are going to be high impact and drive my strategy forward. And obviously those are the things I'm going to do first. They're quick, they're easy, let's get them done. Now there are going to be some things that are actually quite hard to do, and they are going to have a big impact, but they're going to be tough. And actually, those problems are where we're going to start struggling with momentum, because actually we're going to be 6 months into a piece of work and I've still not seen the results, and I'm starting to lose the enthusiasm that you're describing. Now, these difficult to do but high impact activities are really what's going to take you over the line. So we need some way of maintaining that momentum. And so there's this other box, and there's this box that's actually not very massive impact, but is actually quite easy to do. I've always seen those as kind of motivators, because actually when times become hard, just getting something done, getting a win, getting something finished really just lifts the human spirit. So actually, if we were to start breaking down some of our roadmap into, these are the quick wins, these are the things I can do tomorrow, these are the things that we can get done, massive impact, brilliant. There's some longer term projects here, and those are the ones where we know we're going to struggle with the momentum. Those projects, we need to get them started, they need to run alongside, and then occasionally, is there something that's really easy to do? It's not going to have a massive impact, but actually it's going to give me a sense of satisfaction that we're still moving forward. And it's that constant progression moving forward. Now, what we can do is we can help those individuals understand what are their quick wins, what are their motivators, what are their long-term projects. And actually, we can help them kind of go, look, you don't want to get all your quick wins done straight away, perhaps. Maybe you want to bank a couple for a little bit later on in the journey. You certainly don't want to get all your motivators done, because when time gets hard, that's where you can motivate your workforce and say, look, guys, it's been a tough year, but look at what we've achieved. And they may only be small, but we are progressing, we are moving. And then when the big stuff lands and you have the massive step change in your strategy or the massive step change in your result, that's fantastic. And that will carry you forward anyway. But it's those dark days where you've been at this for 6 months and you're going, is it ever going to get any better? And actually the reality is, find something that you can complete and just lift the spirit. And in that roadmap, there might be 100 things you're going to do over the next 5 years, or 3 years, or whatever it is. There's 100 activities that you're going to do. Some of them are not going to change the world, but actually you can do them, and they will help keep that momentum going. The whole purpose of momentum is movement, isn't it? It's all about moving forward. And actually, if I can just keep my strategy moving, that I can draw strength from.
I think there's also an element of deliberateness, right? So I mentioned in the last question, market visits, building rapport with the team, understanding people outside of the workplace, what drives them, what motivates them. That helps you in many forms. So you create a nuanced understanding of the intangibles of that organization or that group of people. And so I would layer on top of that know what the tangibles are, know what the things are that are non-negotiable. And there may be, as you say, like a bar, it may be the, in the technology world, there's the must-haves, right? Then you have the should-haves, then you can have the could-haves. But also know what levers to pull to give the team the motivation and the drive to maintain that momentum. And that may be intangible, maybe things like taking your team to dinner. It may be recognizing a birthday. It may be giving time off in lieu. It may be some people's worst nightmare, but playing sport after work. You know, whatever it is that driving force that maintains a level of cohesiveness that is driving you towards a shared goal. And that doesn't matter if your team is 2 people, 20 people, or 200 people, right? It just does not matter. And then the capability of the team, that's all a future consideration. But at the momentum stage, it's about being pragmatic in that, right? And being fully aware of, if you're a leader in an organization, or you own or lead that organization, how you can inspire people to build something bigger than themselves, because effectively that's what business does, right? Yes, you have your one-man bands and they're brilliant at executing and perhaps building a lifestyle business, but the minute you go beyond one person, it's bigger, and it needs to be perceived, understood, and operated that way. And that's the other thing I would bring to the table around maintaining momentum. There's a degree of tangibles, but the most important thing I've always found out through my career is build intangibles, value, shared experiences, shared goals. As you say, the dark days, sharing the wins. It will have us more, they maybe in the good days, sharing the pie, right? These are all ways of incentivizing people to go and develop a collective sense of success. And I think that's really what you're trying to do.
Great responses, gents. You know, this reminds you of something that a concept is actually a mathematical concept around Fibonacci and the golden ratio. And the Fibonacci is like a series of numbers, and the number ahead builds upon the number previously by adding the previous number onto it. So it's like 1, 1, 3, 5, 8, so on and so forth. But it's also can be used as the golden ratio, which is a mathematical ratio on how nature works. And the way I've come to learn it, it's a relationship to growth and our experiencing our true nature, which is to grow, which is to develop and to expand. And I think as long as we're in alignment with that true nature, the experience of momentum is always going to be happening. So if momentum slows down, it almost it just symbolizes, or it signals us that we're just maybe out of alignment in some shape or form. We're, not making our decisions. We're actually not sticking to our roadmap. And it's an indicator that just, maintaining momentum is also recognizing, what is stopping the momentum. It could be something around motivation. It could be something right down to the nature, the emotional experience that people are having on this journey, and actually addressing that right down at the root level, and getting behind that and having those human conversations and resuming an experience of connection with one another is really powerful. And I think quite fascinating that a lot of what we're talking about, yes, we can talk about actualizing a material experience, but a lot of this is about the connection we have with each other and the relationship we have with one another in relationship to the thing that we're trying to build together. So I love that, you talked about, banking the wins for later when momentum has slowed down. That's supremely important, especially when we're constantly asking ourselves the question of, where are we at right now, the current reality, the current situation, because the current situation is always evolving. Let's not forget that. The current situation doesn't stay at the same conversation that was had at the beginning. It's always constantly changing. That's why it's important to have that conversation. And part of that is in relationship to the momentum and maintaining it and making sure that we have the wins. And if we're not having the wins, addressing them in a way that we can connect as a team, as a group, as a collective, as a tribe to keep moving forward. So amazing, fabulous stuff, guys. Thank you. So the final sort of question, or the final sort of step that we would be taking is resourcing this entire experience, resourcing the roadmap, giving the energy or the components necessary, not only to maintain the momentum, but to also make sure that we're actually heading in the right direction. So, Steve, I'll kick off with you, and I just wanted to ask, like, when it comes to resourcing this structure, this roadmap, what have you typically seen as not the difference between what is absolutely vital, what is bedrock and foundational, and making sure that the adequate resourcing is there, and what is, perhaps trivial and actually not that important, and whatever else you want to say.
Thank you. I go back to something I said earlier.
Sure.
So we were talking a little bit earlier, and I kind of used the analogy of kind of 100 people, how many's looking back, current and future, yeah? So you can do this with your inbox, your email inbox. When you get back to the office this afternoon, have a look at the emails that have come in. We've been sitting here for a couple of hours. People are maybe listening to us for an hour or so, and they've maybe ignored their emails. And then you kind of go back, you download your emails, and you see there's 50 things come in your inbox. And you think, oh, my life. And you look at those 50 things, and you ask yourself, well, hold on a minute. How much of that is actually worrying about something that's already happened? How much of that is worrying about now? And how much of that is taking us forward into the future? And I think the concern I have with resourcing roadmaps is we are very good at creating them. There's lots of good visionary people in the organization, lots of good process people in an organization. We're very good at, this is the vision, this is where we currently are, these are the steps that we're going to take. And then we assume it magically happens. And we assume that suddenly, somewhere, this is going to get done. And yet we're all really busy people. We're all working our 40, 50-hour weeks. We're all being pulled from pillar to post. There's people ringing us up and going, I need this doing, I need that doing. And, Avneet, you've got several businesses, so you're always being pulled from one way or the other, yeah? And it's actually, you stop for a minute and you go, okay, well, here's my organization. How much of my time do I spend driving the business forward? Because that's what, in essence, this is. We are talking about driving a business forward. And if you're not spending any time doing that, it's not going to magically happen. So the first thing I would say is look at your organization, look how much resource you've got looking at yesterday. Now, the thing to bear in mind about yesterday is all you can do about yesterday is learn from it because it's happened. Yeah. You can't go back in time and fix it. If there's a problem, if there's a success, all you can do is learn from the past. With this point in time now, how many people have you got worrying about today? Well, all you can do today is be efficient. So all you can do today is just get today done as good as possible, as quickly as possible, as efficiently as possible. And how many people do you need doing that? How many people do you need worrying about that? And then actually my final question would be to a leader or a manager. I would be trying to say, there you go. If you want to know how much resource to put in, ultimately it's, are you a leader or are you a manager? Because let's be honest, managers worry about today and yesterday. Leaders worry about today and tomorrow. Yeah. So actually, when it comes to resourcing the change, when it comes to resourcing the strategy, whether you are a leader in position, I'm the chief exec or whatever, or actually, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the cleaner could be a leader because actually he or she is worrying about tomorrow. She's not just cleaning up the mess today.
Leadership's not a title, right? It's a way of operating. That's what it is.
Very much so. Yeah. And this starts to kind of bear into this kind of leadership role. But I think from a resourcing point of view, you can't put a number to it. It's almost impossible to put a number to it. But what I would do is I would ask every organization, the more you put in, the faster you'll get there. But if you've got a 5-year plan and you haven't put enough resource in to get all the things done that need to be done, no surprise, it won't be done in 5 years. Mm-hmm. Likewise, if you can chuck resource at it, it'll be done quicker. And so there is almost a nice linear relationship between how quickly I can get this done versus how much resource I put in. And if I'm not prepared to put anything in, well, nothing's going to happen. So we do need people to worry about tomorrow. And we pay some people in our organizations an awful lot of money. And we think to ourselves, well, actually, I'm paying you to worry about tomorrow, not yesterday, because I can't do anything about yesterday.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic, right? Because you look at resource and resourcing the roadmap. So, we've gone through all the steps in this podcast today about how to take an idea, understand how to execute it, get to executing it. And then really what we're talking about now is not just momentum, but how do you keep that road as smooth and as efficient as possible. And although you can say this is the 8th topic, arguably it's like sits in all of them, right? So my previous corporate roles as a leader, we'd look at the talent that we had in the organization and you'd map them and say, this person's a star, this person's a really good performer, but they're not interested in managing people or leading teams. So we, exceptional set of hands at doing X. These people, maybe they need to move to a different part of the organization because they're not quite a fit. Or these people have had their time in the organization and it's time for them to move on, right? Like having that awareness of who's in the team can contribute what is really important. So you've got an understanding of their personal dynamic, you've got an understanding of their dynamic outside of work, what motivates them. Some will want more money, want promotion, some will want an easier life, some will want a functional role, and some will, as I said, like they will naturally churn or move out of your organization over time. None of which is a bad thing, it's just understanding their capabilities and mapping your organization accordingly, right? So that's a big part of it. But resources, not just people. So if I go back to the strategy, people, process, and technology angle, like we've done a whole separate podcast on AI and the value of automation and the value of enabling organizations to go faster with less, right? And that in itself is a really key consideration. So whatever sector you're in, how much can you automate, how much can be done by machinery, how much can be done by technology is really important to keep in mind. And I think that probably the final point here is like resource also means investment in people, investment in the dollars or pound notes, and investment in time and automation. You look at that / machinery, right? Like you're creating an ecosystem that needs to be, so you use the Cheetah analogy. You go fast and you go hard. You might not do that forever, but that's what you've got to do. But you can't do that without planning. So Cheetah's not going to use its energy. It will look around for its prey. It will identify its prey. Half the day it will rest. It will be up in the tree. And then it will plan when it's going to go fast and when it's going to go in for the kill. And then at the end of it, one of two things will happen. You've either achieved the outcome and it's got its meal, or it doesn't. And then it will go through that cycle again. That is business in a nutshell, right? It doesn't have to be that dramatic, of course, but you get the point here. It's about creating a lean, focused machine that is delivering something bigger than one person as a collective success. So yeah, it's a good way to bound that. So
fabulous stuff, gents. Yeah, resourcing. My final thoughts on that is, resourcing reminds me, it's very akin to energy and energizing the entire engagement appropriately with the right people, with the right technology, with the right attitude. Is whatever we would count as a resource. It's a form, it's a package, it's a certain amount of energy, and making sure it's the right type of energy and putting it in the right type of places at any given time. And I think it's again, I really appreciate that you said it's not like an 8th step. It encompasses the entire experience and the entire engagement. How are we managing our resources at any given time? An important part of the conversations that need to be had all that. And sometimes we don't know, and hence where we would want to support you, and then having the conversation, okay, are we using the resources in the best way? And have we got the right resource? We got the right energy to energize certain parts of the journey, of the roadmap. But gentlemen, thank you very much. This has been a very deep, a very explorative conversation around a journey that we would typically take you on if you had to engage with us. Look, if you're a business, an SME business, and anything has piqued your curiosity, you want you need some support, you need some advice, or you're just curious about maybe garnering our support in any shape or form, please do contact us. We're happy to answer questions. And really, we genuinely want to support existing businesses and a new wave of businesses. And we want to just share our wisdom quite openly. So please get in touch with us. And if we can support you in any shape or form, we're more than ready and available. All right. Thank you for listening. And it's a bye from me, bye from Stephen, bye from Avneet. And we'll see you on the next episode. Cut.
Brilliant.